Hello, everyone. It's midnight in the wizard study. I'm Herrera Kamin, and I thought I'd do a little bit of rambling about what I consider to be the pinnacle of the science fiction experience, at least in written form. So, my third favorite sci-fi book of all time, is probably it's got to be The Dark Forest by Cixin Liu. The second book in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. And so The Dark Forest, what I love about it is that I was on a bus reading it, I remember, and I hit a certain point in the story where I was audibly reacting to what I was reading. I'm pretty sure I was reading it, on the bus going like, oh my god! Like, it's involuntarily, reacting to this thing I was reading. It was crazy. It was crazy. Like, that book starts slow, arguably, and it takes you on this journey at first where you're not really sure where it's leading. And that's part of the magic trick that Cixin Liu pulls. I really hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Cixin Liu. I've heard various ways to pronounce it. That's how I'm going to pronounce it for this video. I hope that's all right. If I've got it wrong, please correct me. Anyway, you might find yourself, while reading The Dark Forest, thinking, where the hell is this going? And what the hell is all this? Like, there are some very strange aspects early on in the narrative, but the main concept of the wall facers, this group of people who have to come up with a plan to deal with this alien invasion that's gonna come to Earth in 400 years from basically the present, or a little after the present, whenever the book begins. To me it was maybe a few years after the present day, something like that. Anyway, the wall facers, this group of people who have to come up with this plan to stop this alien invasion in 400 years, but because these aliens, the Trisolarans, because they have total surveillance of all of Earth and all of humanity and everything that humanity is doing, and every system of information that humanity has, every hard drive, every book, every database, every archive, the only place that's safe from them, the only place they can't see into, is the human mind. And so these wall facers have to come up with these plans, independently of each other, to stop the Trisolaran invasion, but they can't say out loud. They can't tell anyone. They can't divulge what these plans are. They have to keep it secret somehow, and yet still enact them. So they are given, these insane privileges and powers by the United Nations. Basically, the ability to do almost anything they want. Anything they ask for will be given to them. And there's this thing called the wall facer smile that I just love, where anytime a wall facer says something, that's kind of off or seems strange or duplicitous, such as, I'm not a wall facer. I don't want to be a wall facer. People look at them with this smile.
I'm not a wall facer. I turned it down.
The wall facer smile, like, aha, you don't want to be a wall facer. On your way, Mr. Wall Facer. That kind of thing, right? And the main character, Luo Ji, the reluctant wall facer, is so compelling. Then, toward the third act, this series of events happens that is maybe the most mind-blowing thing I've ever read in fiction. I mean, I couldn't believe what I was reading. I couldn't, it was insane. And things kept happening that, it kept topping itself. Something that was so shocking, so breathtakingly wild and dark and fucked up. And then, before you know it, as you're recovering from that, something else is building up. Something else is already happening. Oh my god, what the hell? Is this really happening? And I can't even say what these things are, right? Because I don't want to reveal too much. Let's just say that the Netflix show, Three Body Problem, the Western adaptation of this book series, is currently filming its second and third seasons back to back, which means that in the second season, in all likelihood, they are going to reach this point. And I think seeing that event, well, let's say seeing those three events that kind of happen back to back and that carry you through the third act of the book toward the end, seeing those on the big screen, well, the small screen, on the television screen, seeing those events rendered in cinematic form is maybe the thing I am most looking forward to in the next few years of cinema and television. And I think that the showrunners, David Benioff and Dan Weiss and Alexander Wu, are doing a really good job of adapting Cixin Liu's Remembrance of Earth's Past. I think they're doing a really good job. I have some quibbles here and there with this adaptation. Mainly, I think they've broadened some of the concepts to the point where they're a little goofier, let's say, than they are in the book. But I think they are keeping in mind the cinematic form, and where the show Three Body Problem is maybe a little too over the top. I actually think that works for the adaptation because it's trying to convey how mind-blowing the books are, or should I say, it's trying to convey the mind-blowing feeling of the books, which, the books themselves are over the top as well, but in a kind of different way, because the books really take the time to revel in the scientific concepts that they're exploring. The show is more about showing how aesthetically, visually, cinematically wild these ideas are. So, it's not a perfect adaptation, like most adaptations, but I really enjoyed the first season of Three Body Problem, and I enjoyed it more when I rewatched it, because I showed it to a buddy of mine, and I watched it for a second time, and I enjoyed it more on the rewatch. The characters are adapted in a way that is quite dynamic and engaging, and I understand Cixin Liu's complaint about the adaptation. He was saying, about the Netflix series, and this isn't a problem that the Tencent adaptation of this series, so the Chinese adaptation, this is not a problem that version has, but in the Netflix version, all these experts in their fields who are kind of called upon or summoned to the stage to deal with this alien threat, in Netflix's version, they all know each other. In fact, they're all university friends. And Cixin Liu is correct in saying that's a little weird, right? You would have this panel of international experts who would never have met each other, right? They would never have known each other growing up. They would all have studied in different schools. But I forgive that aspect of the show because I think it really delivered on the emotional aspects, the feelings that the books evoke. So I think it's a very good adaptation, and I'm very excited for season 2, which is going to adapt my favorite book in that trilogy, the second book, The Dark Forest, which, as I've mentioned here, is probably my third favorite science fiction book that I've ever read. So maybe in second place, I would put Children of Dune. So, the third book in Frank Herbert's Dune saga, but really the first proper sequel to Dune, because Dune Messiah is sort of, so the book Dune is split into 3 parts, right? And Dune Messiah is like the 4th part of that first book. So Children of Dune is the first real sequel, covering the story of Leto II and Ghanima Atreides, the son and daughter, twin siblings of Paul Atreides. What blew my mind about Children of Dune, there were many things that blew my mind about it. One of the things that I really loved about it was the extent to which it delved into the nature of the psychedelic experience. That might sound kind of funny, but because there's so much. I don't know if the word psychedelic is overused in modern discourse, but the psychedelic experience, so the experience of taking psychedelic substances, is, I find, quite elusive when you try to actually pin it down in literary form. Now, of course, you can read things like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, or Tom Wolfe's The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, right? These stories that delve into the culture of psychedelics, and but to actually capture the moment-to-moment experience of being in a psychedelic trance, of being caught up by a psychedelic substance as it works its way through your body and mind, is something that I have not encountered that often in books. And Children of Dune is one of the books I look at that really, really nails it. I mean, Frank Herbert obviously had personal experience with psychedelic substances. In Children of Dune, there's this part where a Gurney Halleck comes up to Leto II with this syringe of blue spice extract, and he says, "You're to take the worm trip, lad." Just, and then I remember, after that, when Leto II does become consumed by this psychedelic substance, by the spice extract, working on his mind, he, the way Frank Herbert writes it, just takes you into this sort of labyrinth of shifting, dream-like corridors of a brain under the influence of something like psilocybin or LSD, where your mind sort of becomes untethered from your body and goes flying after certain ideas or concepts or images. And that's the thing, right? So Frank Herbert's Dune Saga is weird. It's deeply, deeply weird. And, some people don't read past the first book, which is probably the least weird of all 6 of Frank Herbert's original Dune books. But I personally think that that's a mistake to stop at the first book, I really do think these books get better and better as they go, from Dune to Dune Messiah to Children of Dune. I like God Emperor of Dune a little bit less than Children of Dune, but it's still a really great book. And then by the time you get to Heretics of Dune, maybe that one's a little too weird. I don't know. I still really like Heretics of Dune and Chapter House Dune. But I do think that Children of Dune is the high watermark of Frank Herbert's original 6. And so, yeah, Children of Dune is weird as fuck. Right? It's trippy. To me, at least, it echoed my own personal experiences with psychedelic substances so closely in how it shapes the way in which your brain processes information. I thought it was really, really accurate. And, something else that Children of Dune does really well is that it ramps up in pace. So it has this kind of slow and plodding opening, and the journey it takes you on seems to be meandering and slow at first. But at a certain point, it begins to leap forward with these breathtaking bounds, and it feels like being on a runaway train that can't stop, and it hurtles towards its destination. And the character of Alia Atreides, Paul's little sister, and what happens to her, and what she becomes, and what she then has to fight. It's twisted and demonic, and it really, really gives her this arc that I found so tragic, so unforgettable. I think that's all I can say about that without getting into spoilers. So, Children of Dune would be in second place. And I think probably my favorite sci-fi book of all time is Hyperion by Dan Simmons. And there's just Probably also when it's paired with the fall of Hyperion as this one giant story, I think that might be my favorite journey that I've ever taken within the genre of sci-fi. And so why is that, right? Like why did those books resonate so strongly? And mainly to me it comes down to the emotion that Simmons is able to convey within those books. Um, by the time I got to the end of Hyperion, so if you haven't read Hyperion, I strongly encourage you to pick it up and give it a whirl. It's really really good. All right, it's worth it. It's one of those books where, and mileage varies. Obviously, I have heard some people say they find it quite boring. I did not find it boring at any point. If you haven't read it, think the Canterbury Tales in space. And a group of pilgrims, all telling their stories as they journey toward the mysterious time tombs on this remote planet called Hyperion. And as they tell their stories, gradually unraveling the mystery of why they're on this pilgrimage to begin with, and what lies waiting for them at their destination. And the final story in Hyperion got me really emotional. And by the time I got to the final few pages of that book, I really felt like I had been transported somewhere otherworldly and magical. And the Fall of Hyperion carries a lot of the strengths of the first book further into this explosive climax for the story. But what really impressed me about what Simmons accomplished in those books is that he presents so many ideas that are that on paper sound very whimsical, almost like they could come out of the pages of fairy tales or fantasy books. We're talking like flying carpets, portals connecting myriad worlds spread across the cosmos, and trees that serve as interstellar ships, and ancient structures moving backward in time, and giant living islands, and this thing called a wind wagon, so a vessel that looks like a galleon, but that has a giant wheel on it, traveling across a sea of grass. Grass which stretches, really, really high, and that if you fall into its depths, you will be probably eaten by strange serpentine creatures, that sort of thing. So, another reason why I really like Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion is because reading those books, I actually hadn't looked at when they were published. And to my great surprise, I discovered that they were published in 1989 and 1990, respectively. And I was convinced that they were written in the early 2000s because of how prescient they were about the internet and artificial intelligence. And that's the magic of science fiction, right? These ideas are not actually totally new. Right? These writers have been exploring these ideas that are now becoming highly relevant in our day-to-day lives, in the real world. These ideas were explored in these fictional settings in the past, and it is thrilling to discover that sort of repository of prescience and foresight, and sometimes it almost feels supernatural, like clairvoyance or future sight. And it's just these authors who had they had very keen grasps on these scientific concepts, and were able to carry them forward into these speculative ideas that then pay off years and years later when they sort of manifest in the real world. I feel like that last sentence I said wasn't a very well-constructed one. But so it goes. It's midnight in the wizard study, and I'm rambling. So Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion, that occupies sort of my first place in the annals of science fiction that I have read, right? Only that I have read. So there's obviously a great wealth of sci-fi out there that I have yet to get to, and I do hope I will live long enough to read as much of it as possible. So there it is. My favorite sci-fi books of all time. And I guess I kind of cheated because I was trying to make this, a top 3 list. But I'm treating Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion as one single giant book. But I think it counts because that's kind of how they were intended to be read anyway. As one single giant volume. Split into 2 parts. So I think it counts. But either way, this is either my top 3 or my top 4 favorite sci-fi books of all time. So yeah. Those are my favorite works of science fiction. This video is probably pretty long-winded already, so I'm going to end it there. This has been a very caffeinated midnight rant from yours truly, your resident crazy author talking to a wall in this little random corner of YouTube about things that interest me in fiction, in literature, cinema, television, all that stuff. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and yeah, I guess I'll sign off. I'll see you in the very next video. Okay. Take care. Bye for now.